This is a Michael Massa film. We welcome you to see the impact that Esau had on the world. Today, we gather to reflect on how Esau made profound ways in which war and conflict have shaped our world, often at the hands of a select group of individuals. Throughout history, the decisions and actions of a few have had lasting impacts on the many, leaving indelible marks on our societies, cultures, and global landscape. From the ancient empires of Rome and Greece, where strategic minds like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great redefined the boundaries of civilization, to the modern conflicts of the 20th and 21st centuries, led by figures such as Winston Churchill and Adolf Hitler, the influence of key individuals on the course of war has been undeniable. Their ambitions, ideologies, and leadership styles have determined the fate of nations and the direction of history. Jeremiah 2:11. Has a nation changed its gods, even though they are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. Matthew 24:7. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. 8. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Genesis 27:38. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. 39. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. 40. And by thy sword shalt thou live.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
In June of 1864, the war between the states was entering its final year, and one of the main thoughts that occupied President Abraham Lincoln's mind was the part played by Rome in the war. Lincoln said repeatedly, "This war would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons." This seems to be a strange statement by President Lincoln, considering what is taught today about the war between the states. Nothing is ever mentioned of a religious element in the war, or that the Pope and the Jesuit Order were intimately involved. But Lincoln was not the only voice raised in opposition to the Pope's meddling in the affairs of this country at that time. Samuel Morse, the inventor of Morse code, traveled to Europe and Rome in 1830 to do his own investigation into the conspiracies hatched against America. After returning home to the United States, Morse wrote 2 books warning Americans of the threat from Rome. Morse would continue sounding the alarm throughout the 1800s and went to discuss the situation with Lincoln after his inauguration.
Samuel Morse, of course, is the inventor of Morse code that was used for many, many years. And Samuel Morse wrote a book called Foreign Conspiracies Against the Liberties of the United States. It was published in 1835. And he shows in that book that the Holy Alliance and the Leupold Foundation out of Austria, controlled by the Jesuits, and the Jesuits themselves were the agents to overthrow the liberties of the United States, the Federal Republic of the United States, and to replace it with a papal centralized government as the Vatican is run.
But today, one looks around us to see U.S. presidents and congressmen and women groveling before the Pope. Lincoln's words would seem ironic. Consider this also. In April 2008, the President of the United States, George W. Bush, rushed out to meet the Pope at his plane. Does this not seem to be odd behavior? For the first time in history, a U.S. president went out to meet a religious leader, or for that matter, any leader, upon his entry into the U.S.
No president in the entire history of the United States has ever greeted a foreign diplomat like that, ever. They wait until they're brought into Washington or something. They don't go out on the tarmac. This is a first.
What makes this even more egregious is that the current Pope is a former head of the Office of Inquisition and a former member of the Nazi Party in his youth.
You know that Cardinal Ratzinger was the Grand Inquisitor of the Vatican before he became Pope Benedict. You're aware of that. I assume other people are not aware of that. For a Jew, the Inquisition has such awful, awful memories, and we are inviting the head of the Inquisition to the Jewish state. I gave a lecture yesterday, and these are the points that I brought up. You don't invite the Grand Inquisitor to Israel. It's that simple.
How did we go from a nation on the alert against the Pope and the Jesuits' desire to bring America down to one of accepting them as friends? Simply put, we have sold out.
Attack on America looked so much like a formula action-packed Hollywood disaster movie that it had "Made in the USA" written all over it. The only difference is it used real props and real people. It had terrorist villains, American firefighter heroes, fireball explosions, collapsing buildings, pedestrians chased by dust clouds, and it even had a God Bless America music score. Well-positioned cameras shot the action-packed drama from every conceivable angle.
Just the picture of the helicopter landing and the president walking in, and then the 19 hijackers have been Saudi nationals. So in the terrible... He said that he didn't believe that Osama bin Laden... No one has blamed or accused him formally.
That how many people worked in the city is confirming that some 265 firefighters are believed.
None of us will ever forget this day.
People who knock these buildings down will hear all of it soon.
Says America Remembers, Sunday, 8th.
The timing, the title, and the eerie advertisement for Harvey Weinstein's Lord of the Rings movie called The Two Towers was a prophetic and disturbing coincidence. Profits from the Two Towers movie were small change compared to the 911 reality disaster movie, which has become the world's top-grossing production of all time. The only thing missing are the 911 producer, writer, and director credits. But it doesn't take an Enron accountant to figure out who's cashing in. During the first week, the 911 producers made a spectacular fortune just on the stock market alone. How? By knowing in advance that the stocks in airline and insurance companies associated with the 911 crash would fall in value. Using that inside information, they made negative bets on the stock market called put options. Put options are bets that a certain stock will fall in value by a certain date. It's big risk gambling, unless you've got inside information that can turn your bet into a sure thing. But that's illegal if you get caught at it. Put option bets on the decline in 911 related airline and insurance stocks skyrocketed by a whopping 600% just before 911, which means that somebody knew about the attacks before they happened. Who exactly were those somebodies? Merrill Lynch and HSBC, Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, the Bank of America, weapons manufacturer Raytheon, the Lehman Brothers, General Motors, Swiss Re, Munich Re, and AXA Re Insurance Company, which owns 25% of American Airlines. These insiders bought put options through Deutsche Bank.
Most demanding clients trust Deutsche Bank to perform. Deutsche Bank, a passion.
Buzzy Krongard, the former executive director of the CIA, just happened to be the manager of Deutsche Bank. And so the profiteers from 911 were not Osama bin Laden or his band of U.S.-trained Arabs. They were blue-chip Israeli, U.S., and British businessmen. Within the first week, the 911 producers sucked up $40 billion in box office profits from U.S. taxpayers who were hypnotized, terrorized, and traumatized by the infinite reruns.
Think of it as a conspiracy theory true or false test. A. When George W. Bush started his first oil company, who helped fund it? Osama bin Laden's brother and brother-in-law. True or false? B. After a terrorist bomb at a barracks in Saudi Arabia killed 19 Americans, who got the multi-million-dollar contract to rebuild? The bin Ladens. True or false? C. On the morning of September 11, 2001, who was in a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington? George Bush Sr. and Osama bin Laden's brother. True or false? Actually, the answer could be D, all of the above. Because believe it or not, as far-fetched as they sound, each and every one of those things, the bin Laden link to the Bush Oil Company, the bin Laden construction contract after the terrorist bomb, and the bin Laden-Bush meeting on 9/11, is true.
Many of the facts surrounding the events of 9/11 point to a cover-up, like the fact that the Bush administration ignored all of the advance warnings of the 9/11 attacks. Warnings from FBI agents like Colleen Rowley and from the famous Phoenix memo were not only ignored, they were suppressed. FBI Deputy Director John P. O'Neill quit his job when his investigation of Osama bin Laden was blocked. According to a September 24th Newsweek article, top Pentagon officials canceled their travel plans for 9/11 because of security concerns. While the American public were sitting ducks, all of America's political, military, and corporate VIPs were kept out of harm's way. 2 Muslims accused of the 9/11 hijackings took their flight training at Rudy Decker's Huffman Aviation School in Florida. Rudy Decker's is linked to the CIA and drug smuggling through Carib Air and Britannia Aviation, which shared the same small Venice airport with Decker's. The media reported that on the night before the attacks, accused ringleader Mohammed Atta and 2 other Muslim hijackers got drunk, fondled naked dancers in a Florida strip club called Shuckums, forgot their business card and their Quran holy book at the bar, publicly bashed America, and loudly boasted about impending bloodshed the next day. Would devoted and highly secretive Muslim hijackers risk their planned mission by attracting so much negative attention? And why were they in Florida instead of Boston the night before their suicide flights? On the early morning of September 11th, 19 Muslim men well known to intelligence and security agencies supposedly waltzed past airport security checks, boarded 4 passenger planes, and turned them into deadly missiles without even a hitch. By 8:13 a.m., flight controllers temporarily lost radar contact with American Airlines Flight 11 and reported a suspected hijacking. Even though Andrews Air Force Base is only 10 minutes from Washington, emergency response fighter jets took close to an hour instead of the typical 15 minutes to scramble and begin searching for the hijacked planes. By then, it was too late. President Bush already knew about the first Flight 11, which occurred at 8:46 a.m., when he sat down to chat with school kids at Booker Elementary School. It wasn't until 9:05 a.m. that he was notified that a second plane, Flight 175, had also crashed into the World Trade Center and that America was under attack. Instead of being whisked to safety in this national emergency, Bush nodded and continued chatting with the kids for another 20 minutes about a pet goat, while American citizens were burning alive and leaping to their death from the smoking towers.
Wailing against the wind as they fell, almost as if they had second thoughts. It was absolutely horrifying.
And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder exactly what President George W. Bush knew about the attack, and when he knew it. According to the official White House version, it was at this moment in a Florida classroom that Bush learned the second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that the U.S. was under attack. But here's what George Bush himself said almost 3 months later when asked about September 11th.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And it said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Now, wait a minute. George Bush was told about the second plane while he was inside the classroom. So you just heard him describe seeing the first plane crash on television that day. But that's impossible. No one saw the first plane crash on TV on September the 11th because the videotape of it didn't surface until the next day.
At 9:55 a.m., President George W. Bush took off in Air Force One with no escort or protection from fighter jets and circled around for the next hour. Why was the president's plane airborne and unescorted for an entire hour while hijacked planes were roaming the skies?
It has not gone unnoticed that several Protestant presidents have attended Mass and taken communion at Catholic churches. Since one cannot take communion at a Roman Catholic service if one is not Catholic, several presidents have misled their supporters into thinking they are Protestant when they are not. Furthermore, those in power are often Roman Catholics outright, so it is expected that they will obey orders from the Pope. From U.S. presidents to kings and queens to religious leaders throughout the world, those in power meet the Pope and bow down to him. Even when President Obama went to the Vatican in July 2009 to discuss the world economic situation, he too bowed to the Pope. Upon leaving, President Obama said, "We look forward to a very strong relationship between our two countries." It is important to remember these words of President Obama and what they mean. The Pope is not just a spiritual ruler, he is a territorial ruler. The name of his country since 1929 is Vatican City.
The Pope is a monarch. He actually, according to various books, the Pope is the monarch of the world. Not just a religious leader, he is actually a political leader. The Vatican is actually a small area over in Rome whereby the Pope is the ruler of that small area. The actual name Vatican I found very interesting. It actually means worship of the divine serpent. So we find that the very basis of the Vatican, the very word itself, means the worship of serpents.
But from Rome's perspective, the Pope rules over more than Vatican City. He rules over the earth both spiritually and materially or temporally. According to the Roman Catholic teaching, the Pope can keep you out of heaven, and he has absolute authority over you on earth.
And when I speak of the Pope, I speak of the papacy, that the papacy claims its two powers. Its first power is universal spiritual power over all individuals, that every person must be subject to the spiritual power of the Pope, that there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church, which is the doctrine of the Council of Trent, as reaffirmed in the documents of Vatican II of the 1960s. It's still on the books of canon law. And the other power of the Pope, which is the second key, as you see the two keys in the Pope's flag with the Triple Crown, Lord of Heaven, Lord of Earth, Lord of Hell, and the two keys, spiritual power. The second key is the temporal power. And the temporal power is this, that the Pope believes he has the right to rule the government, the civil government of every nation. That temporal power has never been denied, it's never been disclaimed.
But there is no question that the Pope wields both swords, both a spiritual sword that the public sees, as well as a political sword which most people do not see.
So it is very interesting and unsettling to those who love freedom and the right to worship God as one sees fit, to see our leaders submitting to the Pope of Rome. Let us revisit Lincoln's words. We have discussed the popes and the papacy, but what about the other group Lincoln mentioned? He spoke of the sinister influence of the Jesuits. Who are the Jesuits?
Jesuits are a group of people that were raised up right around 1535, 1540. Their leader was Ignatius Loyola. They basically had two purposes. One purpose was to destroy the Protestant Reformation, because as you remember, Martin Luther had appeared at the Diet of Worms in 1521, stood before Charles V and the Holy Roman Empire. And so the Catholic Church sought to stop the Protestant Reformation that Luther began, and they couldn't do it. And so about 20 years after Luther stood at the Diet of Worms, the Jesuit Order was created. And one of their purposes was to destroy every vestige of the Protestant Reformation, both in the religious realm, in the political realm, and in the economic realm, because the Protestant Reformation not only affected the religious arena, it also affected the political and the economic arenas as well. That was one goal of the Jesuit order. The other aspect was to restore the supremacy and dominance of the Pope throughout the world.
The Jesuit order has directed popes concerning policy, both foreign and domestic, since 1540, in particular since the Council of Trent.
The Council of Trent, indeed, it started in 1545. It went for the next 18 years. That doesn't mean that they stayed there for 18 years. They met in different places, but over that period of time, the various leaders of the Catholic Church and the newly formed Jesuit order would come together from time to time and discuss how the Catholic Church would respond to the teachings of the Protestant Reformation. Would they accept them, or would they completely reject them?
So the doctrines that were being championed at the Reformations, the doctrines of grace, justification by grace through faith, justification by faith alone, sola scriptura, only the scriptures, by grace alone, through faith alone, etc., etc. No baptismal regeneration, that there is only salvation in Christ, that we do not participate in our salvation. It's not a joint effort of man and God, etc., etc., etc. All the doctrines championed by the Reformers were absolutely accursed and condemned and reprobated by the Council of Trent that the Jesuits really oversaw from 1545 to 1563. It was an 18-year council in the town of Trent, Italy, and that is the foundation of what we call the Counter-Reformation.
And the Council of Trent laid out the focal point, the direction that the Catholic Church would go for the next 4 centuries. Basically, at the Council of Trent, they decided that tradition and what the church fathers of the Catholic Church taught would continue to be the sole authority in the Catholic Church. Now, of course, there's other aspects of that, other teachings that branch off from that, but that is the basic sum of the Council of Trent, that tradition would still rule the Catholic Church. The anathemas that they have come out with that came from the Council of Trent to destroy heretics, to destroy those who would uphold the Word of God, those still live today.
That's correct. The papacy has not rescinded any of the curses set forth in the Council of Trent. In fact, the Council of Trent ends and says, "Accursed be all heretics. Accursed, accursed." Every pope has to swear to uphold the Council of Trent. And if you read the documents of Vatican II, put together by Abbot, it shows you right there that every pope must swear to uphold the Council of Trent, even though in the 60s, when they were calling heretics separated brethren, with that delusion and illusion, they still did uphold the Council of Trent, as well as all the former papal bulls condemning heretics and calling for kings to kill them out of their dominions, like the doctrines of Pius IV.
The head of the Jesuits is the Superior General of the Order. He is called the Black Pope.
The head of the Jesuit Order is the Black Pope. The man who is currently there, he was just recently elected, Nicholas Adolphus. The Black Pope is the head of the Jesuit Order. He is called the Black Pope not because he is of African origin, but because he is in the dark. We see the white Pope, we see Pope Benedict XVI, because he's visible and all the world knows who he is. But the Black Pope remains in the dark, behind the scenes, and so few people know he even exists. But that's why he's called the Black Pope, and he's the one who heads the Jesuit Order.
There is an ongoing war against anyone who resists the power of the Pope. And this war is directed by the Jesuits. This war is not waged openly by the Jesuits. The Society of Jesus moves in the shadows. They infiltrate and get others to do the dirty work of assassination. If armed conflict is needed, they use the army of one nation to bring a disobedient nation to its knees.
The Jesuits would do that very thing. They were very intelligent. They're still very intelligent people. What they would do is they would infiltrate. They did it through economics, through the merchants. They would then come in, start teaching. They were very wise people. They would then infiltrate not only into schools, but they then would infiltrate into local government and then rise up to higher government officials. We find that repeatedly in the book by Avril Manhattan called Vietnam, Why Did We Go?, where he talks about how they followed this exact plan throughout Southeast Asia. They did it in Japan. They did it in China. They did it in Korea. They did it in Vietnam. They did it all along the Pacific Rim. Well, eventually what would happen, you would have created Catholic cities where all the people in towns would become Catholics. Well, they would then try to put their Catholic ideals onto the major religious populace of a country. In the Far East, of course, the major religious populace would be the Buddhists. So these Catholics in these countries, these converts to Catholicism, they would try to push their Catholicism on their Buddhist friends. And when the Buddhist friends rejected it, the Catholics would start to use force. Well, then the Buddhists would appeal to the local governments, the state governments, the national governments, and then there would be revolution. It got so bad in Japan that in 1639, the Japanese emperor, he said, no more Catholics, no more Europeans will come to our island again. And that ban stayed there for almost 2 centuries. This happened throughout the Far East and in other countries throughout the world.
Why has this assault on the non-Catholic world been ignored by most people, especially Protestant ministers?
Billy Graham he didn't protest towards the latter part of his life. For the first part, I think he was solid when he first started. But along around the early 60s, his voice was silenced. Robert Schuller, Paul Crouch, Hal Lindsey, Pat Robertson, James Dobson, all of these men, they're not protesting. What they have become are agents of Rome. I remember back when I was starting my student teaching, I was teaching 7th grade history to young people talking about the Pilgrims and Puritans coming over to America. The book said absolutely nothing about why they were coming to America. And I was just reading, and I've got a book here called the Rothschild Money Trust, and also a book about the Rockefellers, the Rockefeller File by Gary Allen. But these people have set up trusts, and they have rewritten the history books. They have rewritten the history books so that the 7th grade history book that I was teaching out of said nothing about the Reformations.
We have to remember that the papacy, specifically the Black Pope, controls all high-level Freemasonry. That includes the Pope's Masonic Jewish Zionist running his Kingdom of Jerusalem. That includes the top Freemasons in this country, especially the temple there in Washington, D.C. That includes all of your big evangelists. For example, Billy Graham is a 33rd degree Freemason. Now, I know the Billy Graham organization denies that, but it's still the truth because we know, according to the honest 33rd degree Freemason who was truly converted to Christ when he believed the gospel and was saved by the grace of God. His name was Jim Shaw. That when he was inducted into the Order of the 33rd degree in Washington, D.C., he said there were two former presidents there on that in that council.